The morning was quiet in the woods, with the scent of pine drifting through the crisp air and the cabin standing sturdy as ever against the rise of the sun. I stepped onto the porch with my mug steaming in my hands, feeling the warmth of the coffee against the chill of dawn. This place was more than a home to me. It was refuge. It was history carved into logs I had sanded and polished with my own hands. And every corner held stories of long nights by the fire and long days of building with sweat and stubbornness. I took a sip and let the silence settle until the sound of gravel crunching under tires cut through the peace. My eyes narrowed as a shiny sedan rolled slowly up the drive out of place against the rustic path. The door swung open, and a woman stepped out, heels clicking with sharpness that did not belong in the dirt. Her name was Linda Carver, president of the Homeowners Association, an embodiment of forced smiles and whispered gossip. She adjusted her blazer as if preparing for a performance. Her lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. Good morning. She sang like she owned the land beneath my feet. I frowned and asked, "What are you doing here, Linda?" Before she could answer, the other door opened and a man stepped out. He carried a clipboard, a suit stiff, and his gaze sweeping over my cabin with the calculating eyes of someone appraising a commodity. Linda gestured with a flourish. "This is Tom, a realtor. We thought your cabin might make a wonderful listing." The word slammed into me harder than any fist. Listing my cabin, not for sale, not now, not ever. I set my mug down on the railing and stared hard at my cabin. "Is not on the market, Linda." She waved her hand like I had said something silly. "Oh, I know that, but buyers these days love to see potential, and technically the HOA has certain rights to present community properties for interested parties," she said as if she was reading from a manual. "That is not how this works." I snapped. My voice echoed louder than I intended, and the birds in the trees scattered. "You cannot just bring strangers onto my land without asking, Linda." She tilted her head with that infuriating smile. "This is just looking no harm done." But harm was done. My privacy was already pierced. My sanctuary reduced to spectacle. Tom was scribbling notes as if my fireplace, my hand-built deck, my view of the lake were bullet points in a sales brochure. I felt my stomach twist with anger and something else, to a sharp sting of betrayal. Linda turned back toward the cabin, speaking loudly, so Tom could hear. "Imagine what a new build here could fetch: floor to ceiling windows, lake access, maybe a modern design to boost the neighborhood value." She looked at me like I was the only one in the room who could not see the obvious truth. I clenched my fist. My grandfather had passed this land down to me. It was not a bargaining chip. It was blood and memory and sweat. I told her flatly, "You have no right to do this. Get off my property." She raised her brows as if amused at my defiance. Her voice softened, but her words cut like a knife. "Be careful. The HOA only wants what is best for the community." I knew that tone. I knew it from the way a snake hisses before it strikes. It was a threat disguised as kindness. Tom glanced between us, clearly uneasy, but Linda was unmoved. She thrived in control, and in this moment she thought she had it. I stepped closer, my voice firm. "You crossed this line again, and it will not end well for you." Her smile only widened before she turned on her heel and gestured for Tom to follow. "Come on," she chirped cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. "We have more to see." They left as if they had simply stopped by for tea, and I stood there, heart pounding, watching the dust rise behind their car. The silence returned, but it was not the same. The woods no longer felt like mine. The porch no longer felt safe. I looked at my cabin, the logs weathered but proud, the smoke chimney standing tall. The thought of strangers walking through the rooms, touching the walls, peering into the corners like scavengers, turned my stomach. I felt a heat growing in my chest, a mix of fury and resolve. Linda had crossed a line. She had not just trespassed on land. She had trespassed on the very soul of my life. The cabin was mine, and she had tried to sell it like it was hers. That was not community. That was theft with lipstick. And as the dust of her sedan vanished down the gravel road, I knew this was no misunderstanding. Linda had made her move, and the fight had only just begun. The days that followed felt like a siege. Flyers appeared in mailboxes across the neighborhood, printed in glossy colors, announcing that lakefront property might soon be available. Neighbors whispered in the lane, some with excitement, some with suspicion. My phone rang at odd hours, realtors leaving cheerful messages, offering evaluations and marketing packages, each of them certain I was preparing to sell. I deleted every voicemail, but each one fueled the fire in my chest. Whenever I drove past the HOA office, Linda was there, standing with arms folded across her blazer, smiling with smug amusement, as if daring me to confront her. She looked like a cat that cornered a mouse and believed it could play forever. One evening, I decided to put an end to her games and walked into the monthly HOA meeting. The small room buzzed with talk, but fell silent When I entered, Linda sat at the center of the long table, gavel before her papers spread neatly. She greeted me with a false "Warmth, Mr. Peterson. So good of you to join us." I leaned forward on the table, ignoring her pleasantries. "My cabin is not for sale. Stop sending people to my property. Stop spreading lies. This ends now." She tilted her head, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Her voice was honeyed, but her words carried venom. "The community must always consider its future. Your cabin sits on prime lakefront, and frankly, it no longer fits the aesthetic of the neighborhood. A new bill would raise values. For everyone, you should be thanking me." The room stirred. Neighbors nodded hesitantly, some eyes lit with greed at the thought of higher values. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "You are talking about erasing decades of history. This is not about value. This is about my home." Linda leaned closer, her perfume cloying the air. Her voice dropped. "So only I could hear. Careful. The more difficult you make this, the less friendly we will be." I stared at her. She smiled. Why did a room buzz on around us, as if nothing had happened? The days grew worse. Strangers appeared on my porch. While I was gone, I returned from town to find a young couple with their realtor peering through my windows, laughing, as if they already owned the place. The sight froze me, then burned me alive. I stormed up the steps. "What do you think you are doing?" The couple stammered apologies, eyes wide with shock. But the realtor just shrugged. "Linda told us this property was open for viewing." The words hit harder than any fist. I stood there, fist clenched, heart thundering. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag them off my land. Instead, I forced my voice to cut like steel. "This is private property. Get off now." They scrambled away, but the damage was done. My sanctuary had been treated like an exhibit. My walls reduced to decoration for strangers who thought they could buy a dream that was never for sale. That night, I sat by the fire, shadows dancing across the logs. I thought of my grandfather who had built this place with his bare hands. I thought of the years I had spent preserving it, repairing every board, stacking every stone. I thought of Linda's smirk, her belief that she could intimidate me into surrender. The anger that pulsed through me was sharp, but underneath it a colder thought settled. Direct confrontation would not work. She thrived on rules twisted to her advantage. She thrived on neighbors who feared her, an illusion of power. She created every word I spoke. She twisted into arrogance every protest. She turned into selfishness. If I fought her openly, she would only tighten her grip. But arrogance could be a weakness. She believed she controlled the story. She believed she was untouchable. And people like that always overplayed their hand. I stared into the flames until the logs cracked and felt a firelight flicker across my face. And in that moment, the resolve hardened. Linda thought she had the upper hand. She thought she had already won. But she had underestimated me. She had mistaken silence for surrender. The next time she sent strangers to my door, they would not find an open porch and an easy target. They would find a message carved so clearly that no one could mistake it. The battle was no longer about reason or negotiation. It was about outsmarting her, turning her arrogance into the rope she would use to hang herself. And as the fire burned low into embers, I realized I was ready to play a different game, one she would never see coming. Sleep became a stranger as I paced the cabin each night, the fire throwing restless shadows across the walls. My mind spun with possibilities, every scenario ending in the same conclusion. Direct resistance was useless. Linda had the neighbor's ears and twisted the rules to her liking, but arrogance made her blind. She believed herself untouchable, and people like that eventually stepped straight into the snare you lay for them. I began with the simplest act: protect the cabin itself. I drove to town and returned with heavy chains, new locks, and reinforced latches. The gate at the end of the gravel drive was fitted with iron links thick enough to stop anyone short. I installed cameras at the corners of the property, small but precise, their signals feeding straight to my phone. Each ping of motion would tell me who crossed the line. No more strangers peering through windows without consequence. But defense was not enough. I needed offense. I needed something that would not just repel intruders, but strike back against the very heart of Linda's illusion. She had declared to the neighborhood that my home was an open-door commodity waiting to be sold. If I countered that narrative publicly and loudly, she would be forced to choke on her own lies. So I built a sign, a slab wood nearly as tall as me, painted with thick red letters that shouted across the lane, "Private property, not for sale. Trespassers will be prosecuted." My hands shook as I wrote the words, not from fear, but from the surge of satisfaction that came with every brushstroke. Then came the final line, the one that turned from warning to weapon: "Ask the HOA president about false listings." I carried it to the gate at dawn when the air was still cold enough to sting my breath. I dug the post deep into the earth, anchored it firm, and stepped back. The message glared bright against the trees, impossible to ignore. I secured the gate with its heavy chain and padlock, then wiped the dirt from my hands, and looked at what I had made. It was no longer just my defense. It was a mirror held to Linda's face. The effect was immediate. Within hours, I saw neighbors slowing their cars, eyes widening as they read. Some laughed, some frowned, but all of them whispered the sign was a silent accusation. And accusations breed doubt, doubt in Linda, doubt in her authority, doubt in the very story she had spun. By the afternoon, my phone buzzed with an email from her. The words were tight with fury. "You are embarrassing the association. Take down that sign immediately, or there will be consequences." I read it twice, and then smiled as I typed the reply, short, simple, sharp, looking forward to them. Every camera notification after that fell electric. Every car that slowed at the gate, every whisper that drifted down the lane was proof the bait was working. Linda was cornered. The very neighbors she had convinced of her vision now stared at her with suspicion. The realtors she had courted began backing away, not wanting their names tied to scandal. But the true battle had not yet arrived. The sign was only the first blow. The real strike would come when Linda tried to prove she still had control, when her pride forced her to make one last grand display, and when she did, she would find herself trapped in the spectacle of her own making. I stood on my porch that night, looking across the darkened water of the lake. The moon cast silver on the waves, and the wind carried the scent of pine through the air. My cabin stood tall, its walls strong, its gates locked for the first time in weeks. I felt calm. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. Linda believed she had forced me into silence, but silence is not surrender. Silence is a pause before thunder, and soon she would hear the storm. The morning came bright and sharp, the kind of day when the air itself feels like it carries expectation. I sat on the porch sipping coffee. When the first ping came from my phone, the cameras showed cars rolling up one after another, and to the edge of my gate looked like a small parade. At the front was a gleaming sedan I knew too well, and stepping out with heels clicking against the gravel was Linda, her face painted with determination and that familiar, cruel smile. Behind her came two realtors carrying binders and folders, as if they were about to present a showcase. The cluster of neighbors trailed behind, drawn by curiosity and gossip. Their voices buzzed as they pointed at the locked gate, at the heavy chain, at the bold red sign that stood like a sentinel over the gravel path. Linda approached with her chin high and her voice loud enough to carry "Open up." She declared, "We are here for the tour." I stood tall at the other side of the gate, arms folded, my voice steady, read the sign. The crowd shifted and murmured. Some squinted to make out the words, some gasped softly as they reached the final line, asked the HOA president about false listings of realtors, exchanged uneasy glances. One raised his phone, take a photo. The whispers turned sharp, the crowd's attention shifting from me to her. Linda's cheeks flushed with sudden bloom of red. She forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "This is slander. Remove it at once." But I kept my voice firm and clear. "Funny," I said, "because last week I caught one of your tours on my porch without permission. I have it on camera if anyone wants to see." The neighbors erupted. Some laughed outright. Others gasped. The realtors stiffened their jaws, clenching as realization settled on them. They had been dragged into something rotten, and they wanted no part of it. Linda stepped forward, her hand trembling, though she tried to hide it. "You cannot do this." She spat. "You cannot humiliate the association in front of everyone." My smile was calm, but my words sharp. "I am not humiliating the association, Linda. You did that all by yourself. The only thing I am doing is protecting my home." Her eyes darted to the neighbors, to the cameras at the corners of my cabin, each one a silent witness, recording every flicker of fury. The realtors began stepping back, gathering their folders, their voices low with excuses about needing to be elsewhere. The neighbors whispered louder, some shaking their heads, some turning their suspicion into outright disdain. The power she had wrapped herself in for years slipped away thread by thread, unraveling in the sunlight. She reached for the gate, her hand shaking with frustration, but the chain held solid. Her heels dug into the dirt as she hissed through clenched teeth, "You will regret this." I leaned in close enough that only she could hear, though the crowd strained to catch the words. "No, Linda, the only one who will regret anything here is you step foot on my land again, and I will press charges. And this time, there will be no whispers, just police reports and lawyers." Her eyes widened just for a second, the mask cracking long enough to reveal the panic beneath. Then the mask slammed back into place. But it was too late. Everyone had seen the weakness. The mighty president of the HOA had been cornered and exposed in daylight with no defense left. She spun on her heel, the sound of her footsteps sharp and angry. As she marched back to her car, the crowd parted for her silence. Following her like a shadow, the realtors hurried, after her muttering excuses. As they slipped into their vehicles, one by one the cars pulled away, leaving only the neighbors who now looked at me with something different than suspicion, respect, maybe, or at least recognition, that I had stood against her and won. I remained at the gate until the last car disappeared down the lane, then unlatched the chain and walked back to the porch. The sign stood tall, its red letters blazing against the green of the woods, and I knew it would stay right where it was every time Linda passed by. She would see it every time she tried to muster the illusion of control. She would be reminded of the day she lost it. That night the lake shimmered under the moon, the air calm again, the cabin wrapped in peace. I leaned back in my chair, coffee warm in my hands, watching the silver ripple across the water. My sanctuary was mine once more, not a showroom, not a bargaining chip, not a prize for someone else's greed. And though Linda might still sit at the head of her little board and call herself president, she no longer ruled over me. Her power was an empty shell shattered by her own arrogance of victory. It was not loud or violent, but it was final, and it was mine. I raised a mug in a silent toast of quiet woods to the steady cabin walls, to my grandfather's memory, and to the sign that still guarded the gate, a reminder carved in wood that some battles are won not with fists, but with patience and precision. And in the end, as the night wrapped itself around the cabin, I smiled, knowing justice had been served exactly as it should be.